All right, I guess it's time to start. You all sitting comfortably? Good. So today I'm going to tell you about presenters, about the MVP, about some common mistakes that we have done in our applications, then how we try to fix them and how we failed even more miserably, and finally I will tell you some other examples of how things are working at the current moment, and we guess they are working fine. So some things about me. I'm Mateusz. I work at IG. That's a trading software company as the Android tech lead. I'm also a member of the Google Developer Expert Program on Android, and I co-organize the GDG Krakow meetups, mostly the Android ones. And the agenda for today is basically simple. How can you make your presenters thinner? And then some live coding. There is one issue with live coding, so basically I don't have slides for 45 minutes because I imagine that, all right, I will do some live coding, people will appreciate. Then during the opening today, I realized that I have this. So who wants to see live coding with one hand? Everyone, right? Okay. So I'll tell you a little bit about our app and about one screen in particular. So as I said, we are a trading application, and there are like several different trading products our customers can trade on, right? So we have something called like a spread betting account, we have contract for difference, we have share dealing, like multiple times, right? And we have a screen when you can go from the app and basically access all of them, switch those accounts and so on. So fairly simple screen, right? Looks like just two tabs, stabilizer at the top, some snack bar at the bottom, displaying a list there and there. Pretty simple, right? So let's kind of try to divide the screen into the smaller pieces to see what exactly is happening there. So list of your accounts is displayed. We have categories, so basically you have grouping, right? So share dealing is actually another group of the accounts that we have within the app. The current account you are currently logged in, it has the blue indicator. There is a comms bar at the bottom, which we are using to announce some important news to the customer, or to basically tell that, hey, there is this new kind of a product, would you like to give it a shot? Tabs there, obviously, and this kind of a more actions icon over here, you can set as a default and rename. And technically, all the figures that you see on those screens, like all the balances, as you can see, I'm not a very active trader, or my balances are 0. So all of them are taken from REST, right? I make a REST call to our HTTP service. I get those figures, the initial values, and then I subscribe to some kind of a WebSocket that is basically refreshing those values. So if you're actively trading, all those figures are blinking all the time, right? And tapping on the item makes it expanded. So currently this one is expanded, but as you can see, the other ones are collapsed. So you tap on them, and you have a nice animation that they are expanding and collapsing. All right. Switching the account and rename switch account looks more or less like this. We start a dialog with the edit text in it. You put a new name, and you submit. The change is being streamed to the service, and the change is applied on the backend. And also we support empty states there. So for example, so basically you have a live and demo accounts, right? So demo accounts is something that you can trade on the virtual money to see if this is something for you. And some of the customers, actually a big amount of customers, don't have those demo accounts, right? So we also need to prepare the empty views with a call to action to actually create this demo account. So bunch of things are happening on this screen, which at the beginning look like a simple list, right? And this is quite a common case, that you get some sketches from the designers, and then you start working on something, like 3 developers in parallel, and then you realize that actually there are some things happening on this screen, but we didn't initially think about the architecture. Of course, we thought about it, right, in a general way. We use MVP in our app. Depends on your applications, you have like a different approaches to the architecture. So you just follow this, right? Hoping for the best, because it works in the other parts of the app. So you follow the architecture and you come up with the solution. And I agree that it's still a fairly simple screen. It could be much more complex. But there were a bunch of the challenges in terms of the code architecture that we faced on it. So I realized that it's going to be a good example to show on this presentation. So our general architecture looks more or less like this. So we have a view. So view is basically the interface implemented by either a custom view or the activity or a fragment. Each of those views have exactly one presenter, and presenter have exactly one view. And presenter is talking to, like, ideally one interactor, usually more interactors, right? Interactors are like use cases. So in this particular case, we had like a get accounts list interactor, set account name interactor, set account as a default interactor, and so on and so on and so on, right? And they were put into one common presenter. All of them were injected there, and this presenter was basically managing the screen, right? And in order to do that, this presenter needed all those interactors in place. Please note that all of those interactors, depending on the UI interaction that was expected by designers, had their own way of dealing with the progress, with the errors. There were like different ways of presenting some different states to the user, depending on the action this user was performing, okay? So what you get was accounts presenter Java with over 700 lines of code, or if you just convert it to Kotlin 350, but it still doesn't make things easier because it's still as much complex as it was, right? And the other thing is that we try to unit test. I mean, we do unit tests. I think we are doing it pretty well. However, this particular class on the initial implementation had like 50 of them, right? It's good to have many unit tests. It's good to have nice coverage. But actually, in case you have shitload of unit tests for a single unit, that might ring a bell, right? Maybe this class does too many things. So the thing was, like, what was the problem, right? This was a feature. This was like a completely brand new feature that we were working from scratch. We had the previous account screen. Then it was completely different. And we decided to go for this one. And like we had 3 developers working on this in parallel, right? So basically, how it works usually in the teams is you start with some skeleton. So in our case, it was like a simple list with the tab layout on the top. And then developers can work in parallel. So one developer is working on set account as default, and the other developer is working on the rename, right? They are sitting next to each other, but they're actually working on the same code base, on the same adapter, on the same presenter, and adding their code there, right? So this is a bit difficult in this case to follow something which is called the single responsibility principle, which I believe you all heard about. And this is actually a tip. So every time you get a failure like we did, so you work on a feature for 3 weeks, you aim it to be like a fresh, new, shiny, well-tested, and then you get like a 700 lines of code cow. The answer is simple, right? Oh, you didn't follow the single responsibility principle. In case you would do that, that wouldn't be a problem. We'll split those things into the smaller classes, right? But does this presenter that had 700 lines of code, how many responsibilities did it have? Like, how can you look on the class and count the responsibilities and decide how many things this class is really doing? The thing is that this is pretty subjective, right? Okay, we can say that, all right, this presenter was basically rendering the comms bar, it was rendering the set account as default, and those kinds of functionality. It was basically a proxy between that particular screen and the interactors. But on the other hand, somebody could say, hey, but this is just one screen. This presenter is doing rendering. Not rendering, like it's doing the presentation logic for this particular one screen. So that's still one responsibility, isn't it, right? So What I want to say by this is, because this particular case, when we had like a 700 lines of code, clearly didn't follow the principle. However, it's not as straightforward, not as easy, especially if you are not super duper experienced, to judge it from the beginning, to basically imagine those responsibilities in your mind and imagine the classes, how they should be structured instead. So SRP tends to be subjective. Some people can claim that two responsibilities are different, but the other person in the room will say that this is basically the same unit. This is so coupled two different things that they're basically one thing. So it's easy to justify, right? It's easy to justify that it's all right till you get to the point when the class is too big. So what can we do better? What are the hard warning signs of the SRP evaluation? What are the hard examples that something is going wrong, like based on the numbers, right? Let's see if we can provide some metrics that we can monitor when we are developing new features to decide whether we are going to the right direction with our design for this particular feature. So one thing that it's pretty common for big classes, especially big presenters in your architecture, they have a big number of dependency injected to the constructor, in case you are using Dagger, right? So I guess we all were there. You have a presenter, then the constructor definition starts, annotated nicely with inject, and then 11 parameters, right? And then you show it to the QAs, or you show it to the designer, and designer says, do you think we could add like one more action there and there? And you say, yeah, sure, and you add 12 and 30. And it's like, whoa, basically you need to scroll the screen to actually see anything besides the besides the constructor, right? So really hard to judge for me what should be the proper number. We started to realize that if the number of injections is like a bigger than 3, something is a little bit smellish already. If it's around 5, then something is definitely bad. But this doesn't need to exactly work for you in this way. To state the obvious, obviously, like lines of code, right? This is not the ultimate guideline. You can have a class which has like a huge number of lines, but it's still kind of doing one thing, like, I don't know, communicating with the Bluetooth printer. So you need to implement some protocol or something, right? It might be massive, but it's still like one thing. Not that obvious is also like a big number of tests for the single unit. As I said, unit tests are amazing. You should make sure that all the logic that you have, non-trivial like getters and setters perhaps, but all the logic that can be broken should be properly unit tested. So unit tests will provide you the guideline, what exactly went wrong and where. But if you have a single unit, not exactly a class, but maybe let's say that for the simplification that you have a unit which is basically a class, and it has like a 50 unit test, something went wrong, right? So unit tests, you should treat them as kind of a documentation. That's a side effect. But if you go to the single file with your unit test and you have like a 50 methods there, and it's even longer than your presenter, right? This doesn't really work. It's not really readable and maintainable. Meta methods on the views interface, right? So as I said, typical approach to the problem is you are having some view in your like Android part of the application, which is, let's say, it's activity, and you are implementing some certain methods, right? In case your view has like 20 methods, it means that presenter can invoke those 20 methods on that particular view. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Maybe this view should be split. And this gets us to the point that it's really hard to make your presenter smaller without actually making your views smaller, right? They are tight. They both reside in the presentation layer, right? Presenter should be able to handle all the cases that you are able to see on the screen, right? So if the view is big, this actually gets you to the situation where presenter will be big as well. So our initial implementation broke all of those. Right, so we didn't realize early enough, and we had to rewrite. It wasn't that bad, took like 2 days. But imagine in case we would basically say, yeah, this is fine, and we keep implementing features in this way, right? In half of a year or in a year, we would basically come up with a situation when stuff really went wrong. So we decided to keep our presenters smaller by keeping our reviews smaller. So this is more or less how it started to look. So the whole thing was the account view. The thing that was rendering a list together with the grouping was the accounts list view. The thing at the bottom was the commons bar, right? Pretty good starting point. All of those had their own presenters, and they were communicating somehow. I'll show you later. Another interesting thing is those empty screens, right? So this is the empty screen, but this is not the typical empty screen which is just displaying the icon and the text, right? It's displaying also the button. And this button, fortunately or unfortunately, performs the action. And this action is actually hitting the API, doing something, listening on the result, and then refreshing the list. So it might be worth extracting it to some separate entity, right? So this was a separate view as well. This screen alone. So our account list view, actually the presenter for the account list view, was getting the data from the API for either your live or for your demo tab. And then based on the response, we were deciding, okay, so the number of accounts is 0, and there was no error. So so I will just let my view know to, hey, you should render the empty state, right? But then this view was attaching the empty state, and that's it. The accounts list view wasn't interested at all in what actions can be performed from that empty state. Only the attach logic was there. And the whole rest was handled by the presenter for this view. So basically we had the presenter, which was having a single method for performing the action, create demo account, and this was what it was doing. And once it was completed, we were refreshing the list, and I will show you how in a second, and then detaching this view from the window. Same happened for the connection error view. This is an interesting scenario because this particular view, so this is a fragment, and it's being reused in like all the parts of the application. We created some kind of a framework around it. So because we realized that, hey, we spend a lot of time on rendering those empty states for each given feature, for each list. Let's maybe do something that will automatically show this in case something goes wrong on the majority of our lists. Right? But it's a separate view. It has its own presenter as well. You get the drill. So how do they communicate? So yesterday evening, I was crafting all my slides to make sure that the code looks fine. But then I said, I'm not the developer conference. Let's do live coding. So let's do live coding. I'm not sure how I'll manage with this thing in my hand, and how I'll manage with the 800, 600 resolution. But hopefully we'll figure something out. What about presentation mode? What about making the font smaller? Oh, I just removed some code. Just give me a sec. I didn't expect that. Do you remember the shortcut in Android Studio to make your font smaller? What? All right. Let it be. Appearance. Whoa, I'm here. Presentation mode. Let it be 14. You can all see it, right? There are some seats in the front. And let's enter again. All right. More or less. We'll be refactoring some names for A or B to make the code look smaller. All right, so I have written a small app. Obviously, I'm not going to show the code of my company here, but I have written a small dummy application that is actually doing a similar thing, just to show off the idea. So that's the Android emulator which got broken also. That's super bad. I'm sorry for this. No worries, we'll restart. That's bad. So I'm going here, going here, going here, going here. It's almost there. Fortunately, we are in 2017, so the Android emulator starts under 1 minute. All right, let's do it last time, and then I have a backup plan, okay? Then we'll be looking on the code in case this will not start, looking on the code and imagining how it will work. And you will need to trust me that it actually works. All right, this is weird. Okay, we'll make it. Oh, really? No, I have a virus. Okay. So let's do it differently to not waste your time. So I have plenty of code here. And I have basically a layout. Wow, I know how to do it. Do we have a marker? Oh yeah, it's here. Look, we'll do it like this. So the application I wrote has something like this, right? I have a screen. I have a list of accounts. Account 1, account 2nd, account 3rd. I have the toolbar here. The toolbar has the action to refresh the list, right? Each of the item have a rename action on it. Let's say like this. And what the rename action does when you tap on it is displaying you a bottom sheet with the input field that's pre-filled with the name. And there is the submit action over here. So once you press OK, the change is submitted to the API, right? So the list is taken from the dummy API that I have created. It's actually not the real API, but you will see it in a second. And then each action here performs some action on that API as well. It's renaming stuff. And also this action in here in toolbar is refreshing the whole thing. And apart from it, I also implemented the comms bar, right? So the user goes to the account section, and there is like a very important message for this user to read. So I just display a toast like, hello, UA mobile. Okay? So you get the idea? I'm really, really sorry that the simulator didn't work properly. It worked half an hour ago. So let me enter the presentation mode again. So let's take a look on the first thing, on the accounts list presenter. So accounts list presenter can be actually done in a better way. Right now you can tell that it's doing like two things. It's talking to the two interactors, right? But this is intended. So I have the interactor which is getting the list of accounts, and I'm getting the interactor which is getting this communication message that I need to display to the user. I'm attaching the view. This is actually the activity that is implementing this interface. And I'm subscribing to two things from those interactors, and then I'm basically communicating this to the result to the view. Okay? What is an interesting thing is actually this interactor over here. This interactor over here uses some class which is dummy API, It's not really a retrofit service, but let's think about this as a retrofit service, okay, for a second. And what the hell happens here? So take a look. So retrofit services, when you create them, they are exposing you a single. You can actually make them expose the observable, but in fact it's a single underneath, right? Because it can either show you a success or show you a result. It's not a stream of things, right? But on the other hand, for the UI purposes, you'll need something more, right? In case you want to make this presenter and make this view with the list work fine, you want to subscribe on the list in your presenter, on the list of accounts. But then, when you refresh, you want to actually refresh the list without performing this resubscription logic, right? So we cannot achieve that with single. A single is not capable in Herych's Java to basically stream you more than one thing, right? It's just streaming a single thing. Are you familiar with Herych's Java, more or less, differences between singles and observables? Okay, cool. So what we have done, we have some kind of, let's think of a behavior subject here as a reactive cache. So this is something that is like a both observable and the observer. So you can actually stream the data there and subject will remember the last state, right? So what we are doing is when we are creating this interactor, we are going to the dummy API, we are getting accounts, then we are converting it to the observable, and then we are doing some magic, converting this to the event object, right? So the event object is actually containing the information whether this is a loading event, or this is a data event, or this is the error event. And this is something we expose to the world, right? And there is a refresh thing, which is doing the resubscription underneath within this interactor and streaming the new results again to your subject, right? So we have the account list presenter, which is doing this thing. So we get the data and we see if this is the error, we show the error. If this is the data, we show the data. And the interface looks like this. As you can see, something doesn't work because the method is not being used, but it doesn't matter. And yeah, the whole activity thing is here, right? So what we are doing here is we are initializing stuff like a recycler view, we are setting the adapter, and we are also creating a Dagger component that is later on reused between like a variety of different views that are on the screen. So this is just displaying a list, right? And currently it's also displaying this toast with the communication, this activity. But let's see something else. Let's see how can we implement this refresh behavior here so it's in the toolbar without actually polluting our activity, which is actually big enough at the moment, without polluting it even more, without polluting our presenter even more. Let's say we can have a separate piece that is doing this thing and this thing only. So I know it's 2017 and people hate fragments, but there you go. It's a fragment. So this is actually an interesting case about fragments that everybody knows that they have like a problem with the life cycle and stuff like that. Not everybody knows that fragments don't necessarily need to have a view. This fragment has no view whatsoever, and this is not a hack, right? This is actually how fragments were designed as well, that they can work without the views. There is like no single onCreate view method in here. So what we are doing here, like we are doing onCreate, we are doing set has options menu true, and then we implement the onCreate options menu and on options item selected, right? And bear in mind that this fragment has its own presenter right now, right? No view. I can basically take this fragment, attach it everywhere, and I have this refresh button everywhere, right? So, and it's pretty simple, right? And if you take a look on the presenter, bam, like, okay, in Java that would be 50 lines, but still, this is pretty simple, right? Usually you need to attach some views to the presenter, but this is not really needed in this particular case. So how does it work? how does this refresh thing, which is like a separate view, right? It's a separate fragment. How this is communicating back to the activity that, hey, you need to refresh, right? And the thing is interactor. So we'll be back in a second. The thing is this interactor, right? So we are injecting it here. And if you take a look here, it's injected here as well, right? So the thing we need to do is just to ensure that we are injecting a single instance there and there, right? So how can you do that? Who knows the answer? Will win the non-existing t-shirt or anything. I'll think of something. Use Dagger. This is basically the answer to all the questions. Have problems at home? Use Dagger. Yeah, so I created something like the activity scope. So every time we inject this interactor from the particular component instance that I'm creating within the activity and sharing then across the whole activity thingy, all the fragments, all the views, and so on, every time we'll inject the same instance, right? So I'm doing refresh. I'm disposing the previous subscription in case it didn't finish, because most likely it's already finished and it's disposed because that was like a single. And then I subscribe again, but the accounts thing, which the accounts list presenter is attached to, is still attached to the subject, to the same instance, right? So I don't even need to resubscribe, right? I'm just doing this thing. Accounts list, presenter, and that's it, done, right? As for this comps bar, we could apply the similar behavior. It doesn't necessarily need to be here, right? Wouldn't you like to get some kind of a flexibility and have an ability to put this comps bar everywhere? I mean, that might be a little bit of the over-engineering, but if you get it for free but just having a better design, then why not? So again, you can create a custom view, or you can create a fragment in case this is just a toast, custom view in case this is like just some kind of a snack bar, for example. And then you do it there, right? And you just attach it to all the places you need it, and this comps bar works in a complete separation. It doesn't need to know about the context in which it's being attached. But right now it's here, and we would add like 5 more actions here. That would be certainly a problem. How is this Dagger component being reused? I think this is more or less a common scenario. So I have this accounts activity, right? And it's doing a thing called, it has the component instance, and it's invoking the create component on reuse. Create component on reuse is doing this thing, right? So if I have a last custom non-configuration instance, then I'm just using it. In case I don't, then I create it. So this actually works fine in a way also that you can rotate your screen, and then the same component, Dagger component instance, will be reused. So whenever you will be reattaching your new activity, your new view to the presenter, and you will be talking again to the same instance of the interactor, it will already have the cached result. So you will not need to wait for the result to happen again. Beware that this works only in case your process isn't getting killed, right? In this particular case, the only thing you can count on is like a save instance state, which cannot work for retaining the Dagger components. Okay, one more thing, yeah? This bottom sheet over here. So I tap here, this one magically shows. And I'm performing an action, right? Very similar behavior. So in the support, in the design library, there is a thing called bottom sheet dialog fragment. So again, this is a fragment, but it's pretty okay in a way that fragments, when they are attached to the fragment manager, you don't need to care about them when you rotate the screen, right? They are there. The instance is retained, so you don't need to manage the state of your entire screen. Like for this case, Fragment Manager will do that for you. Nice thing. So we are creating some view in here, which just has the edit text and a button. It has its own presenter, and the presenter works like this. So you get on account rename. The account ID is actually injected via Dagger. I created a sub-component to our activity component where we are filling the account ID, because this presenter will be working only in context of this particular account always. Whenever we are doing it for the different account, a new instance will be created. And I do rename. Rename returns something called completable or the error, because I'm not really interested about the result itself. I'm interested whether it completed successfully or there was the error. So completable is yet another type of stream that you can have in Herych Java. And yeah, in case the success comes, I perform hide on the view. I just performs this mess. This goes down. I refresh the interactor again. So we are getting a new name of the account, right? That's simple. And the presenter is still 33 lines of code. Just to show a bit on how this fellow is being injected, for those of you who might be interested. So this dialog fragment is getting the component from the activity, right? And then is doing a sub-component. So we are basically building an outer layer on the core component that we have within our activity. And we are creating a module which has this account ID passed through the arguments, right? I have the new instance here in the companion object. And the rename model looks like this. Pretty simple. And this is also the sub-component implementation. So this way, from the screen that manages quite a lot, we managed to split it down into the separate pieces, where not only our presenters are smaller, but also the views are smaller and are more, let's say, modular, like especially for this comms bar that you can add everywhere. So I had a bunch of other things to show, but I guess we don't have that much time, and we'll just go for questions. So, any questions? We still have 7 minutes, so in case you would like to see something live, you will just need to get to the stage, take my microphone, hold it like this, and I will be coding. Yep. Hey.
If we not doing it with fragments, but create several views, for them several presenters, and use it just in one activity. That would be not so modular as you did, but it will work or not.
Of course it will. Of course it will. The only thing about fragments with this actually having the advantage, two things about fragments that have the advantage over the custom views, is that when you attach those fragments, for example, you attach this bottom sheet, right? There is a bottom sheet view, you could use it, but if you attach the fragment instead, and you rotate the screen, or you go to the background and your app gets killed, then you come back, this bottom sheet will be recreated, right? Because Fragment Manager will store itself in the bundle. And the other thing which is nice about fragments, and it's not that easily achievable with custom views, is that they not always have a view itself, right? So this is an example, right? So you don't need to necessarily have a view. Plus, in case you would like to have your own component that you can attach to the toolbar, views don't get the callbacks for the options menu and stuff like this. But we kind of tend to use custom views whenever we can for those things. So those are like the two things, like a dialogues. Bottom sheet is like a kind of a dialogue. and stuff that is modifying a toolbar. For this, we are using a fragment, right? But in case we have not a toast, but something that you saw on the screenshot, snack bar here with the text, this is clearly a custom view. And then you don't need to necessarily fight with the fragments lifecycle, transactions committed after unsafe instance state, and all those problems that you might get otherwise, right? So use custom views whenever you can, but I would say use fragments when it actually feels that this is a proper tool to do the job.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ilyas, and I have a question about the state of all of these things. So if you have a general state, like mutable, some mutable state, which is filled by all of these views, different views, and where do you usually save this for future use? So.
Not sure if I get the question properly. So are you asking, when I show something on the screen, how do I know what the state of the app is?
Yeah, so we have different views, different presenters. We have one activity, for example, and where I usually save this state. So this view are communicating between each other, and then, for example, you need to restore something data or probably some cache after like activity recreation, for example.
Okay, yeah. Well, so yeah, that's a good question. So this kind of shows it, right? In a couple of places within our app, we have the object, which is annotated with this activity scope, right? And is injected to different presenters, let's say, or different interactors. And interactors are capable of modifying the state of this class. And then the other listeners of those changes are notified immediately, right? So you basically have some kind of the object, which you guarantee that this is the singleton in scope of your activity. You inject it to all the places that are interested, and you use it somehow like the, how to say that, like a message bus, right? You are basically sending the message there, communicating states to the things that are interested. Not sure if that answers your question. If it not, then let's speak after, and we can do some pair programming. Yeah, does it answer or not? Okay.
Hi, my name is Alex. I have an interesting question about.
I can hear you, and I can repeat the question if it doesn't work.
I have an interesting question about files amount. If you use your approach, files amount increase in, I don't know, maybe in geometric progression. And in my experience, I hear, especially from beginners, that it's some kind of hell to have deal with such amount of files. What do you think about this case? And maybe you have some advices how to improve this one.
Okay. So first of all, in Kotlin, you don't necessarily have to have such many files, right? But not all that, but doesn't mean that you should put all the classes or the presenters and interactors within the same file, right? My approach is that it's better to have like a lot of smaller files, even if the total number of codes of all of them combined is actually higher than having them in a single file, because it's easier to handle like a piece by piece rather than a whole thing altogether, right? So how to say that? Usually when you work with the code, you are working on some separate unit, right? So for example, your thing is to implement a new action on this bottom sheet thing, right? Having like a smaller things and having them separated gives you an opportunity to just go to this particular class and focus on this one thing only, without looking on all the other things that you might have around, right? Also, like the story, like you might have like a huge pack that is like 100 kilos, right? And you might have like a collection of the smaller bags, which all together have like a 120, right? Still, it's easier to handle probably this 121 because you will not actually lift the 101 at all, right? So it's better to have like a smaller blocks and smaller pieces because it's easy to work from them. That's my opinion. I understand that especially for beginners, it might be trickier to work with the code base that has like a much more files. But on the other hand, they are much smaller, right? We have 30 seconds. One more question, come on. We'll make it. Yeah.
Hello.
Hey.
Okay. You talked about single responsibility, but what if have you maybe different situation when you did a lot of small files, for example, you know, too many classes that goes with one responsibility, but you split them in different classes.
Yeah, sometimes it's more, let's say, maintainable. This is why, okay. So the story about the unit tests, give us one more minute, please. The story about the unit tests. So a lot of people think that the unit tests are testing the classes, right? You write one unit test to test the class. This is not necessarily true because unit tests are testing the units. In majority of cases, a class is a single unit, right? But sometimes you just split the classes that are still doing one thing and one thing only, just to increase the readability of the code. And this is a still single unit that, for example, should be unit tested altogether, right? Because those classes doesn't make sense without each other, right? You don't necessarily need to, I assume that you don't necessarily need to reuse those classes anywhere else, right? So what you are doing is just create a class just to increase the readability. So, what could be an example? Let's say you have a data class that has a first name and a last name, and based on the last letter of a name, it calculates whether this is a female name or a male name. And you could obviously have just a data class with two vals in it, string and string, but it's actually asking itself to put maybe this method within the either the extension method to this data class or within this data class if it's just a private data class. Right? So we were just kind of increasing the readability by splitting the code just to express better what you are doing, not necessarily to split the responsibilities. I'm a fan of this. I do it often.
But maybe it's like overheading with a lot of files. Why do not? It's better to have sometimes one class with one responsibility and don't split. Maybe you have also some ring bells for such situations, or you're fine with that. That okay, better lot of files, a lot of classes, but I see exactly what functionality they do.
Yeah, well, if it's Kotlin or even if it's Java, and I have multiple classes that are actually doing one thing together, I'll still put them into the single file. So they are like separate classes just to express my thoughts better, but they are still in a single file, right? In Kotlin, fortunately, we don't need to think in the same way as we were thinking about Java in the past, that public class, one file, right? You can actually, this is actually solving your problem. You are creating a Kotlin file that is doing the responsibility, and how you structure this inside, this is up to you. I think it depends on the case, really. Hard to say without the example whether this is like overhead or not. There are different cases.
Okay, the main idea is to split big file into the small pieces, and it will be easier to work with.
Divide and conquer.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks everyone. In case you will have any other questions, I am available around